Welcome friends to my YouTube channel Best Audiobooks of All Time. If you like the content of this video, then please share, subscribe, hit the bell icon and like. The second chapter of the book The Honjin Murders by Seishi Yokomizo. Chapter 2 The Descendants of the Honjin. According to the village elders, the wealthy Ichenagi family wasn't originally from O village at all, but from the neighboring town of K. This automatically made them unpopular among the narrow-minded villagers. K used to lie along on the old Chugokukaido, a section of the main route linking East and West Japan. In the Edo period, it was a rest station for travelers, and the Ichenagi home was a Honjin, or an inn where Edo period nobility would stay. However, when the shogun was overthrown and the imperial system was reinstated in the late 1860s, the family had realized that he was about to lose the Honjin. He had the foresight to act before the old feudal system collapsed completely and moved his family to their current location. He was able to take advantage of the turmoil of the time and acquire farmland dirt cheap, instantly becoming a rich landowner. That was why the local people liked to call the Ichenagi family a bunch of upstart kappa, mythical water goblins. This word was a local term of abuse for people who moved from K-town to O village. Anyway, at the time of the gruesome murder, the occupants of the Ichenagi family compound were as follows. First and foremost, there was the widow of the previous head of the family and mistress of the house, Itoko. She was at the time 57 years old. She always wore her hair in a meticulously coiled chignon and never once let her mask of dignity drop. Itoko was immensely proud of being a descendant of a Honjin family. When the villagers spoke of the old matriarch, this was to whom they referred. The dowager Itoko had 5 children, but only 3 of them were living with her at the time. The oldest of these was her son Kenzo, a graduate of philosophy at a certain private university in Kyoto. He had taught for a few years at his alma mater after graduation, but had fallen prey to a respiratory disorder and returned home, shutting himself away from the world. Nevertheless, he was a great scholar, and being confined to the house didn't prevent him from dedicating himself to his studies. He wrote books from time to time, contributed articles to journals, and had become a well-known academic. Apparently, it wasn't his poor health that had prevented him from marrying. He was just too busy with his studies to think about such matters. After Kenzo came Itoko's elder daughter, Teiko. She had married a businessman and was living in Shanghai at the time, so had no direct connection to the events of that night. Itoko's second son, Ryuji, was 35 and a doctor, employed by a major hospital in Osaka. He had not been at the family home that night either. He rushed home right after hearing of the tragedy, and so had some involvement in the immediate aftermath. For many years after giving birth to Ryuji, Itoko and her husband hadn't had any more children. Everyone thought there wouldn't be further additions to the family, but after a gap of almost 10 years, she had another son, and then, a full 8 years after that, a daughter. The boy was called Saburo and the girl Suzuko. At the time of the murder, Saburo was 25 and Suzuko 17. Saburo was definitely the black sheep of the family. He had been expelled from middle school and sent instead to a private vocational school in Kobe. He was expelled from that school too, and at the time of the murder had no occupation of any kind. He used to hang around the house all day. The consensus was that he was intelligent enough but never applied himself to any kind of work. There was also a certain slyness to his nature. Down in the village, he was pretty much universally despised. As for the youngest child, Suzuko, well, I can't help feeling sorry for her. Perhaps it was because her parents were quite old when they had her, that she was rather delicate, like a flower that had to bloom in the shade. In addition to her poor physical health, she was a bit slow. She wasn't exactly mentally disabled. In some ways, she was very gifted. In fact, when it came to playing the koto, one would go so far as to call her a musical genius. From time to time, she would show flashes of incredible insight, but in most everyday matters, she behaved like a child of 7 or 8. These were the members of the main Ichanagi family, but there was another branch of the family living on the same property. The head of this branch family was Ryosuke, a cousin of Kenzo and his siblings. He was 38 years old at the time and he lived there with his wife, Akiko, and 3 young children. Obviously, these children had nothing to do with the murder case, and so I leave them off this list. Ryosuke was completely different in temperament from his cousin Kenzo and the others. He had only finished primary school, but being good at mathematics and a worldly type, he was the perfect person to manage the Ichanagi family's affairs. As far as Itoko was concerned, more than her eccentric oldest son, the absent second son, and the untrustworthy third son, Ryosuke proved to be the closest to a confidant that she had in her life. As for his wife, Akiko, there was nothing particularly distinctive about her. She was just an ordinary woman, obedient to her husband. And so these were the 6 inhabitants of Ichanagi residence: Itoko, the family matriarch, Kenzo, Saburo, Suzuko, Ryosuke, and Akiko. Together, they lived a conservative, traditional lifestyle, peaceful until the moment that Kenzo announced his engagement. Then it was if a large pebble had been dropped into a still pond. The ripples spread wider and further, building into waves of anger. The woman Kenzo wanted to marry was Katsuko Kubo, a teacher at a girls' school in Okayama City. The Ichanagi family was united in their opposition to this marriage, but because they had any kind of problem with Katsuko personally, but not because they had any kind of problem with Katsuko personally, but because they objected to her lineage. Gentle reader, the word lineage, which has all but fallen out of usage in the city, is even today alive and well in rural villages like this one. You might even say it rules every aspect of people's lives. We are now in a period of upheaval following the Second World War, and farmers and peasants are increasingly no longer obliged to kowtow to the upper classes or to show the same level of respect for those with high social standing, fortune, or property. Those values have come crashing down in the wake of Japan's defeat. However, what is still intact is lineage. The reverence, respect, and pride associated with being born into a family with distinguished ancestry are still alive and well in rural communities. And lineage has nothing whatsoever to do with genetics or eugenics. For example, if the family of an established community leader, such as someone who had been a village headman in the days of the shogunate, started producing male children who suffered from physical disabilities or epilepsy or lunacy, each would still be permitted to serve as headman when his time came because his family line was good. This is still true now, and even more so in 1937 when this story takes place. As far as the Ichanagi family was concerned, there was nothing in the world more important than being the descendants of the owners of Honjin. It was everything to them. Katsuko Kubo's father had once been a tenant farmer in O village, but he had been rather more ambitious than the average peasant. He had left the village along with his younger brother and set sail for America. There, the brothers had found work on fruit farms until they had saved enough money to return to Japan and establish their own orchard about 25 miles from their home village. Both brothers married, but the elder died shortly after his wife had given birth to their daughter, Katsuko. Upon the death of her husband, the young widow had returned to her home village, leaving Katsuko to be raised by her uncle. She turned out to be a very studious child, and her uncle spared no expense in paying her school tuition. After graduating from a teacher training school in Tokyo, she took a job in a girls' school in Okayama City, not too far from her home. The fruit farm established by Katsuko's father and uncle was hugely successful. Katsuko's uncle was scrupulously honest when it came to putting his niece's share aside for her, so that she worked as a school teacher, not because it was necessary to make a living, but because it was what she wanted to do. She was a woman in possession of both her own fortune and a career. Despite this, in the eyes of the Ichanagi family, it didn't matter how educated she was, how wise or intelligent, or how large a fortune she possessed. The daughter of a tenant farmer would always be just that, the daughter of a tenant farmer. She had no family name, no pedigree, and they thought of her as no more than the child of Rinkichi Kubo, poor peasant farmer. Kenzo had met Katsuko when he had been invited to speak at a students' group in Kurashiki City. Katsuko was a member of the group. After this initial meeting, Katsuko used to visit Kenzo to ask him for help with the foreign language books she liked to read. This relationship continued for about a year until suddenly one day Kenzo proposed marriage. I have already mentioned how the Ichanagi family opposed this marriage, led by Itoko and Kenzo's cousin Ryosuke. Out of Kenzo's own siblings, it was his sister Teiko who felt the most strongly about the engagement. She even wrote a vehement letter to her older brother on the subject. On the other hand, the middle brother Yuji supported Kenzo and privately sent a letter to Itoko saying that she should let her eldest son do as he liked. However, he never said a word about this directly to his older brother. And what was Kenzo's reaction to all this criticism? His approach was to stay completely silent. He made no move whatsoever to respond to any of it. And of course, water eventually wins over fire. One by one, the opponents ran out of heat. Their voices faded, their steps faltered, and finally, with a wry smile and a shoulder shrug, they were forced to admit defeat. The wedding ceremony was held on 25th November 1937, and that very night the heinous crime was committed. However, before I can get to the gory details of the murder, I must mention a few apparently trivial incidents that seem to have been some kind of prelude to what finally transpired. These all took place on the day before the wedding, in other words, on 24th November in the afternoon. The scene was the Ichanagi family sitting room, where Itoko and Kenzo were taking tea and having what was clearly an uncomfortable conversation. The youngest Suzuko was sitting nearby, happily playing with the doll. This was typical of Suzuko. Wherever she went, she was absorbed in her own world and never got in anyone's way. But that has been the tradition in this house for generations. Itoko had already lost her son over his choice of marriage partner and was apparently still unable to hide her displeasure. But mother, we didn't do that when Ryuji got married. Kenzo didn't even deign to glance at the sweet manju bun offered to him by his mother. Instead, with a sore face, he continued to smoke his cigarette. That's because he's the second son. You and Ryuji aren't the same at all. You are the heir to this family, and Katsuko-san will be the wife of the heir. But I don't think Katsuko can even play the koto. She can probably play the piano. That was the topic of their quarrel. For several generations, the bride of the heir to the family title had been expected to play certain pieces on a koto at the official wedding ceremony. So you see, mother, there's no point in bringing this up now. Kenzo went on. If you had told me about this earlier, I could have prepared Katsuko. My intention isn't to put any kind of damper on the wedding ceremony. I don't want you to think that I'm trying to embarrass Katsuko in any way. However, family tradition is what it is. Just as the tension in the room was beginning to mount, Suzuko came to the rescue. Mama, can't I play the koto? Itoko was taken by surprise, but Kenzo gave a wry smile. That's a lovely idea, thank you, Suzuko. Mother, surely no one could object to Suzuko's playing. Itoko seemed about to concede, but right at that moment, her nephew, Ryosuke, appeared in the sitting room and addressed his young cousin. Suzu-chan, this is where you have been hiding. I have been looking for you everywhere. See, I have finished making that box for you. He was holding a beautifully fashioned wooden box of the size that usually held mikan, mandarin oranges. Itoko frowned. Ryo-san, what's that? It's Tama's coffin. Suzu-chan was upset when someone said she should bury him in a mikan box, she said. Poor Tama, being stuck an old box like that. She refused to use it. So I managed to make this one instead. Yes, poor Tama, Suzuko echoed. Thank you, Ryosuke. Tama was the name of Suzuko's pet kitten, but for the past few days it had suffered from vomiting and diarrhea and had finally died that morning. Itoko grimaced slightly at the sight of this wooden coffin. Ryo-san, she said quite quickly, as if to change the subject. What do you think of Suzuko being the one to play the koto? Sounds all right to me, Aunt Itoko, said Ryosuke lightly, helping himself to a manju bun. Kenzo kept his back turned to his cousin and continued to puff on his cigarette. At which point Saburo came in. Hey Suzu-chan, that's a pretty box you have got there. Who made that for you? You're mean, Sabu-chan. You lied to me. You promised to make one for me, but you didn't. Anyway, cousin Ryosuke made this for me, so I don't need yours anymore. Really, Suzu-chan, I can't believe you still don't trust me. Saburo, did you get a haircut? Said Itoko, glancing at her son's head. Yes, just now. By the way, mother, I just heard something very strange at the barber's. Itoko didn't respond, so Saburo turned instead to his elder brother. Kenzo, yesterday evening you went by the O government office in a rickshaw, right? Did you happen to notice a weird looking character hanging around outside the tavern? Kenzo looked puzzled. What do you mean by a weird character, Sabu-chan? Ryosuke asked, his mouth stuffed full of manju. Well, it's really creepy. They say he had a huge scar from his mouth up his cheek like this, and then he had only 3 fingers on his right hand, just his thumb and the next 2 fingers. Anyway, it seems this man was asking the Okami-san about our house. Hey Suzuko, you didn't notice any strange men hanging around yesterday evening, did you? Suzuko looked up at Saburo and began to mumble. Thumb, index finger, middle finger. As she did so, she moved each of the corresponding fingers on the right hand as if playing the koto. Itoko and Saburo watched her in silence. Rosuke was busy peeling the paper off another manju. Kenzo kept on smoking his cigarette. End of chapter 2. If you like the content in this video, please share, subscribe, hit the bell icon, and like.